So we are basically 2 games into every series in the NBA playoffs so far, and there's a lot of things to learn, but the most important thing that I've gathered is defense. But defense, pacing, and officiating has been such a significant calling card for so many teams so far that it's actually pretty concerning for quite a few teams that have heavily depended on their offensive ability and how quickly they can get up and down the floor. And probably the team that has suffered the most out of this, especially because they are in defensive hell, in the torture chamber, and that is the Phoenix Suns. The Suns, an organization that just went to the finals like 2 or 3 years ago, trying to get back to that point, has restructured their entire roster surrounding a bunch of isolation scorers and has really leaned heavily into offensive-oriented style of play. An organization that really had a high ceiling of what this team could potentially do depending on how optimistic you were going to be on Bradley Beal being added to this roster. However, probably will not reach that ceiling this year because in the first round they matched up with a defensive juggernaut out in Minnesota, and boy, do they got them in defensive hell. It's pretty crazy. It's the torture chamber out there. They got them in handcuffs, and it's not really much that they can do. And before I break down the series in very fine details, just some quick fun facts here. The Phoenix Suns, in the first 2 games, have the second worst offense in the playoffs with an offensive rating of 98.9, tied with the New Orleans Pelicans. In both games, they have not been able to score over 95 points. And in particular, in the last game, there was a 16-minute stretch from the beginning of the second quarter to around the 8-minute mark in the fourth quarter, where the Phoenix Suns were only able to score 25 points in a 16-minute stretch. In that stretch, KD scored 1 for 6 from the field, Bradley Beal 3 for 7, Devin Booker 2 for 4, but also turned the ball over 3 times in the process as well, and also Jusuf Nurkic 2 for 5 with 2 turnovers himself. And in the macro lens of this series, Devin Booker is being held to 19 points per game, shooting sub 38% from the field and 25% from behind the arc. And then you have Bradley Beal, who's being held to only 14.5 points per game, shooting 44% from the field and 43% from behind the arc. But that's really deceptive because he's only made 3 3-pointers within the first 2 games of this series. And throughout the entire series, the thing that they struggle with the most and something they've consistently struggled with is getting quality looks from behind the arc, as they've only made 17 3-pointers throughout the first 2 games, and basically meaning they're only making 8 threes, which if I'm not mistaken is either tied for the worst or second worst 3 points made in the playoffs so far amongst all 16 teams. That's crazy, right? And an even funner fact, I guess you can say, in terms of like favoring the Minnesota Timberwolves because they don't get enough credit, Jaden McDaniels has been an unsung hero so far in this series. He stepped in, gave some huge points to this team in game 2, but overall defensively, bro, what he is doing is just crazy. Suns players are shooting 28.6% from the field when guarded by Jaden McDaniels this series. Be very mindful that most of his time on the floor he's defending either Devin Booker, Bradley Beal, or Kevin Durant. It's actually ridiculous. So how is it possible that we have a Minnesota Timberwolves team that is so great defensively that they're shutting off some of the best isolation scorers in the NBA, and a team that when all 3 of these players were healthy and available, that the Suns' offensive ceiling was on par with really anyone else in the NBA? Well, for starters, it's how this team is being matched up. Now, before the series began, if you watched my last video, I talked about how I thought that Jaden McDaniels was actually going to start on Kevin Durant. He's actually not doing that. And shout out to Chris Finch. He's actually done a brilliant thing and by starting McDaniels on Devin Booker and having Karl-Anthony Towns on KD. Now, this didn't last too long in game 2 because Towns was in foul trouble and they made some adjustments, and that really led to KD struggling also in game 2. However, the genius behind all of this is really just having the ability of having aggressive players being able to stand in front of the 2 guards in Beal and Booker, shut off a lot of the water in terms of what those 2 players are able to provide in terms of not only scoring, but also passing, playmaking, penetrating, and collapsing your defense. And all of that stems from not only great defense on the perimeter, but also the perimeter defenders being able to be very aggressive because they know for a fact behind them they have Rudy Gobert manning the paint. Another thing that has been dispelled in this series, and I'm amazed that we are this deep into Rudy Gobert's career, and routinely I see not only players but ex-players, players that I believe should have a very high IQ about basketball and what it means to be great defensively, consistently and routinely claiming that Rudy Gobert is an overrated defender because his time in Utah, he basically had to not only man the paint, also defend his player, but also mask a lot of the flaws that his teammates had defensively as well. You could very well argue either Royce O'Neal or Joe Ingles were the best perimeter defenders on that Utah Jazz team. And because there are moments where he gets stuck in isolation trying to defend Steph Curry in space, or because there was a moment or a stretch or a series where someone like Terrence Mann was playing small ball 5 and stretch out the floor to the corner, and he had to make a decision on if he's going to help on the rotations or help on the penetration, that now all of a sudden he's an overrated defender. No. Rudy Gobert, just like literally every other all-time great big, needed some perimeter presence for him to flourish, and the fact that he didn't really have that in Utah and still looked as great as he did really is a testament to who he is as a player. And this series, it's very, very clear that now with that type of defensive presence on the perimeter, he can do it basically anything he wants to do. Like defensively, Rudy Gobert is just amazing this series. He's manning the paint, he's defending in space. Even when they play zone, he's able to stunt, recover, still kind of guide certain players and where they need to be. There's a lot of things that Rudy Gobert is doing right in this series, and I hope people are starting to realize how valuable he is defensively. He's actually been so great defensively with his backline help that the Suns have actually been able to get away with large pockets of times of Karl-Anthony Towns defending Kevin Durant, which is where the genius of Chris Finch really steps into play, because it forces KD to try to shoot over length. In game 1, he did a fantastic job at doing so. Game 2, not so much, but the reason why it's so brilliant is not only because due to Rudy Gobert being backline help and due to the already communicated defensive assignment of switching whenever Gobert and Towns are in constant action, regardless if it's pick and roll or just kind of rotating over, that they already know to constantly switch when it comes to defending KD. There's been a lot of things shut off from Durant in terms of getting to the basket or even getting quality looks from 3 as well. And honestly, this takes a lot of defensive discipline. Karl-Anthony Towns in game 1 was getting cooked. He was getting fried. KD was like really giving it to him. But I think all of that was done purposely. Chris Finch knowing that having KD shoot over length, settle with long twos, contested jumpers is the best option for containing Durant. You don't want him to constantly have people in rotation. You don't want to have your best defender being placed upon him, have somebody else go off. And honestly, it's just the best option for Karl-Anthony Towns out there in the starting 5 for him to be defending KD rather than someone else. The other part of it, and that is Jaden McDaniels being defended by Devin Booker. Now, this is where, and I'm honestly not trying to get too deep into my propaganda bag or trying to push agendas, but like, bro, this is the reason why many people like myself are very hesitant on where we put Devin Booker in terms of the hierarchy of players in the NBA, right? Because D-Book, a great offensive player, really, really good. I don't want to downplay him at all, but let's just call a spade a spade. He has received the benefit of the doubt of playing alongside other great offensive weapons that really get way more attention to detail from the defense, and he's been able to flourish. So even though you could very well argue that Booker has a ceiling of a 1, he has been privileged to play alongside Chris Paul and now Kevin Durant, and has not really been consistently treated like a first scoring option until where we are today, and that's Jaden McDaniels just locking him the fuck up. I mean, like, my goodness, Jaden McDaniels has Devin Booker in hell. He has a hard time bringing the ball across the half-court line sometimes. He can't really get loose. He's turning over the ball. The handles is very questionable, and the shot selection seems forced. Even when there's times where Devin Booker has some space to operate in, you can see his hesitation as he's overthinking it because he doesn't necessarily know the level of pressure that is now being allowed from not only officiating, but from one of the best on-ball defenders in the NBA. But more importantly, not only is it taking him out again from a scoring perspective, but also from a passing and playmaking perspective as well, because Booker took upon the pseudo point guard role this year, especially when those games where Bradley Beal was not available. And to be fair, I think Devin Booker did just enough this season to supplement what this team was lacking in that capacity. But when you now effectively not only remove him from a scoring option, but also from a passing and playmaking option, points are not only being removed from Booker, but also points are being removed from role players as well, because the defense isn't shifting at all. Everyone in Minnesota is completely fine with staying home and watching someone try to be a great defensive player in isolation. This not only means that, again, it's going to be very difficult for these players to get off, and they're effectively attempting a bunch of long contested 2-pointers, but also this means that other players such as Grayson Allen, Eric Gordon, Royce O'Neal are now no longer receiving quality 3-point looks, which again is funneling off a lot of the offensive firepower that this team tends to get from some of their supporting cast members. So not only are you cutting off Devin Booker, but you are also effectively cutting off the role players as well, which is crazy. And then you have Anthony Edwards or Nickeil Walker-Alexander who are spending time on Bradley Beal. And honestly, I don't want to make it seem like one player is defending one player all the time. These players are so flexible in a way that they can defend that they can really match up with really anyone. But Bradley Beal this season really was very limited on who he was as a player as well. Part of that was him trying to fit into this team and trying to find himself, but also the fact that he's just getting older. He's dealt with injuries that is really limited in who he is as a player, and those limitations are really starting to show themselves when you're being picked up by a team like this. I mean, it's pretty ridiculous. So effectively, we're talking about a team that is fine with the Suns settling on a bunch of contested 2-pointers, staying home so role players don't get wide open threes, has backline rim protection from Rudy Gobert that is deterring them from even driving on some of these players, while effectively allowing the on-ball defenders to be more aggressive. And even if you get by those players, when you get to the basket, you're going to be contested by Gobert, who's more than likely not going to foul, and is going to make it much more difficult for you to be able to get something off, which also means that you're not getting to the free throw line at all. Add all all of that together, and you effectively have a Wolves team that is shutting down an offense that is supposed to be performing at near historic heights, or at least near league high heights. And now we're talking about like one of the worst offenses in the playoffs so far. And it's honestly what I was attempting to explain to Kevin Durant during the offseason. Your inability to get downhill or get to the basket, which then results into no shifting of the defense, will inevitably be the downfall of this Suns team, and why I don't believe that KD is as good as some people pegged him out to be even last year. It's just not enough. As great as KD is as a player, and he's a really, really great player, but settling for a long contested two-pointers, again, even if you make it at a historic rate, is not producing enough to beat a Minnesota Timberwolves team that isn't even all that great offensively either. Minnesota can have games where they're struggling offensively, but still beat this team pretty confidently because all they have to do is effectively score 100 to 103 points and they're still going to win. I don't want to make it seem like it's impossible for them to win. Of course, you can have a really great shooting game. Getting Karl-Anthony Towns in action and putting him in foul trouble is also a very viable option as well, especially if you want to put a cap and ceiling on what Minnesota's offense can look like. But I just don't really see how this team can be able to keep up with really anyone in the playoffs, because that's effectively how every team is going to defend them. As great as an offensive weapon as Beal, Booker, and KD are as individuals, together their redundancy and talent makes them very predictable to defend. Predictable, not easy, because I don't believe that it's easy to allow KD and Booker to just beat you one-on-one without getting any penetration to the lane. But if you match up against the right team, which Minnesota is, who has a personnel, which you have with Jaden McDaniels, Anthony Edwards, and Rudy Gobert, you are now effectively going to put yourself at a massive disadvantage because you're trying to win a series on long two-pointers when the opposing team is getting a healthy diet of every other efficient look in the game. So before the series began, I had the Wolves in 5. I'm going to stick to that prediction. I'm not going to change it at all, and I do believe we're going to have very uncomfortable conversations about this Phoenix Suns team moving forward, not just from a pure propaganda and agenda standpoint, because trust me, I'm going to get my agendas off about what I told KD coming to fruition, but more importantly about a ball club that has committed a significant amount of capital to a team that cannot compete in the Western Conference, that is really, really talented from top to bottom, and also your best player in Kevin Durant aging at a point where you don't know what he's going to look like in the next year or two. Tough! I already see on the timeline people talking about trading Devin Booker because you can't trade Bradley Beal because he has a no trade clause. It's getting nasty, dog. But hey, let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. If you like this type of a video, let me know down below, and also give this video a thumbs up. It will definitely help me out understanding what you as an audience member want out of this channel. And if you do enjoy these type of videos, I will continue to make them, and you can make sure you hit the subscribe button, notification bell, where you can be updated all the time. And as always, if you want to watch these playoff games with me live at playback.tv/LowsRoom, it's been a hoot, it's been a joy. The support has been unreal. I thank you all immensely for that. Nevertheless, until next time, I'll see you all later. Peace.